So I think I'm going to read 2 short chapters from the novel, and then I'm going to read a very short story that I wrote quite recently, and then, I don't know, have questions if you guys have questions, and then we'll go home and sit quietly on our own, or with others. Okay, so all you need to know about what I'm going to read is the novel is about a man named David and his wife, who's named Franny. David used to work as a dentist. Franny used to work as an esthetician. David lost his dental license and Franny died. Chapter 17. This is before she died. David stood beside his wife at their wedding reception. The event was well attended, in part because it was held at the Old Country Buffet during the dinner rush. Their invited guests didn't seem to mind the $7.99 charge. David had just taken on more debt by buying his dental office, in addition to what he paid monthly for his mother's care, in addition to her old legal bills. Franny and David had been married by the justice that afternoon, and she was still wearing the white lace skirt that made her knees look like speckled hams under heat lamps at the buffet. Patrons of the restaurant wandered into their corner to shake David's hand and tell Franny that she looked lovely. A child gave Franny a fistful of gummy bears from the ice cream station. The young husband of one of David's dental hygienists brought a cooler of beer. David's father returned from the dinner line with a plate heaped with meat. "Pig to pork," he said. He shook his son's hand and picked up a rolled silverware napkin from the table. "Live with meaning and die old." 3 empty plates at a table held corsages as symbols of Franny's parents and David's mother, who had moved herself into a woman's home when David was very young. He couldn't recall exactly when his mother had gone to the home, and he and his father rarely visited. When they did, she always gave David something she had made, a card or ornament, out of the same type of construction paper her son had used in his kindergarten class. Once, the keepsake was a picture she had drawn of David in red and blue marker. His mother had been a math teacher and was the only truly calculating element across the entire course of David's life. She expressed no interest in ever meeting Franny. On their wedding day, his mother called the Old Country Buffet, and the newlyweds passed the phone back and forth while standing at the hostess station. Everyone got a little too drunk and kept eating. They put away plates of meat and baked beans and iceberg salads and ranch dressing. A distant cousin ate only creamed corn. David and Franny sat at the table with his father and the hygienist and her husband. David's father lifted a spoon of mashed potatoes. "Once this was all underground," he said. The hygienist's husband wringed his big arm around David's neck and told him it was good to marry a strong woman who could get herself out of trouble. David imagined Franny pinned under a grain thresher, hefting it overhead into a hayloft. At the end of the evening, Franny placed a dish of pudding by one of her parents' memorial plates and started to cry. The guests had mostly left, save for a patron of the restaurant named Chuck, who produced a flask of whiskey and sat with his back to the wall. Franny wiped her eyes with her mother's memorial napkin and took a pull from the offered flask. That night, Franny and David lay in bed together, immobile from the pleasures of the buffet. She slept, and he examined the muscles twitching under his skin. In those early years, Franny's body lacked the twin mysteries of scent and softness that had initially allured and eventually drove him from the bedrooms of his few previous girlfriends. His wife's scent that night was that of a wet rock, as if she had been created from the stream that ran behind his childhood home. So that's one chapter. They're pretty short. The next chapter is even shorter. Chapter 18. Had a bronchial event. Yeah. Over a lifetime of experience, David's mother learned that institutional food was more or less the same, regardless of the location, purpose, or quality of the institution in question. If they could make a fruit out of a chunk of styrofoam, they would do it. David's mother felt certain that she had once eaten a synthetic pear served to her by the institution. She could discern the pear's flavor, but it registered only vaguely, as if she was experiencing the pear under sedation or in a dream. Its texture was of a wet sponge soaked in chemicals. She fumbled to peel the crimped foil on her orange juice container. It evaded her fingers which felt thicker with every year's birthday card she opened from her son, her old fingers failing even to separate paper from adhesive. He sent old cards, even a few she had given him for his own birthdays. The other ladies read them to her. David sometimes sent the letters her sister had written before she passed. This was before she settled into a less demarcated timeline of growth and weakening. Her hands lost their power to the point where she had trouble handling a doorknob. David's mother fantasized about being able to turn doorknobs. There was the unyielding chill of metal under her strong hand, which gripped and turned so easily, feeling through her fingers the internal mechanism of the door. Her blindness heightened her sense of touch, allowing her to experience an even purer form of pleasure. Each joint in her body moved with a similar efficiency and silence. Shoulder and elbow, wrists, knuckles, fingertips, synchronous. She slowed down the motion in her memory of it, fingers grasping, tucking under the metal with such precision. She could feel the seam where metal met turning metal, the knob's joints meeting her own. In her fantasy of it, she felt so strong that she could rip the knob off the door and hold it in her hand like a stone. The women at this particular institution guided David's mother through open doors in the distant way that they would guide an old woman at any institution. They sat her at empty tables and helped with her playing cards. The ridges and grooves in the cards greeted the sense of touch in her hands, which she still refused to admit was dimming. Oh my God, it's Dan and Amanda. Crazy. So I was purposefully not saying what kind of institution that was. The rest of the book is kind of hazy like that, but it's on purpose, so don't worry. Well, I think I'd like to read a very short kind of germ that the vision I had that started the book. It makes me sound really nuts. And then I'm going to read the short story that I promised I would read you. All right. So here's chapter 4. The vision. He knew Franny had been behind the house. She wore a scarf colored red like the berries that grew back there. Her feet were bare and her ankles were slick with fluid. Something has happened, Franny said. She was standing at the bottom of the stairs. She held the rail and tipped her head back to look at her husband. They held the same rail. You've been tromping berries, he said. It's blood. She held the stairs rail and vomited down the front of her dress. Could you call for help? She asked, wiping her mouth with her fingers. Of course, he said. He commanded his body to find a telephone and determine its use. What's the problem? God damn it, she said. What did you do? He asked. What happened? Could you call the fire department? She sat on the stairs and leaned against the wall with her back to him. He came down and sat next to her. He touched her cold face with his hands. You don't need to call anyone, he said. Forget about it. I love you. What did you get into? She tipped her head to the side and back, squinting at him or resting against the wall. That's your problem, she said. They were quiet for a long time. He listened to her breathing so closely that he forgot to breathe himself. He gasped for air. He prodded at her with his elbow. Doc, he said, you gotta understand. She laughed once. David sat next to his wife for 3 days. They leaned against each other and created a powerful odor. In that way, it was like growing old together. So, okay, that's probably enough of the book. That's what happens to Franny, but what happens? I don't know.